Why Beijing's core interest has become dangerous for India. Why China was almost ready to give up Arunachal Pradesh back in 1959, but today it is non-negotiable.
China's claim over Arunachal Pradesh as a part of its stated core interests.
And why China has decided to take up Arunachal Pradesh just like Taiwan. A US Pentagon report has sent alarm bells ringing across New Delhi by claiming that China has labelled Arunachal Pradesh as core interest. Hello everyone, welcome to Vajiram and Ravi's Flash News. My name is Shubhangi Singh and today we are going to understand the seriousness of China's core interest in Arunachal Pradesh. What does this core interest mean? Why in 1950s China was ready to give Arunachal Pradesh, the sovereignty was acceptable for China, and today we will understand that why this core interest of China is a very serious concern. How come when China was ready to recognize India's sovereignty of Arunachal Pradesh back in 1950s, how it has become a non-negotiable for them and what lies in front of all of this. So let us begin with understanding what exactly has unfolded. So basically a US Pentagon report that has been presented to the Congress that states that China has classified Arunachal Pradesh as a core interest. Now this is an interesting terminology that is being used. We will be deciphering this as well. Now this basically places Arunachal Pradesh in the same category how China sees Taiwan, how China sees South China Sea disputes and how China sees Senkaku Islands. So if we talk about Arunachal Pradesh, which is an undisputable Indian territory, this is the first time Arunachal Pradesh is explicitly being put in this category. And the reason this is such a serious concern is because of the fact that this core interest means that this territory is non-negotiable for China, their strategy and their own country, and it also clearly signals that in coming times we can see escalation, we can see force usage for claim over this territory and multiple things unfolding around it. Now, as I said, when we are talking about the word core interest itself, it is a very interesting terminology with very serious consequences here. So let us start with understanding what exactly is the core interest term in terms of Chinese strategy. So whenever China places any particular place in their core interest, as per their doctrine, it implies three simple things. That Chinese Communist Party will have whole of the political control there. Second, they will be responsible for the economic development in that region. And third, that they will be looking after the sovereignty and territorial integrity. All in all, meaning that it would be becoming a Chinese territory. So wherever a core interest is labeled, these are the aims that China wants to fulfill. And this is a way of saying and implying that there will be no compromise, there will be no negotiation. We will use whatever may to get this done, be it coercion, pressure or force if required. And all of this has come in highlight as it is mentioned in the US Pentagon report, because Chinese rejuvenation, national rejuvenation is being targeted by 2049, where all the core interest tagged places are being considered to be subsumed. And the moment China has tagged Arunachal Pradesh as a core interest, that means China has got up from the table of negotiations where the border dispute could have been resolved, but China has left the table and they have said, we are going to take it by whatever means we seem fit. Now, one thing has become pretty clear in this scenario, that China has decided to leave the legitimate methods and make coercion as the legitimate way out of this situation. But at the same time, there is no deniability to the fact that Arunachal Pradesh remains an integral part of our country and there is no changing to that. In this context, we also need to understand that why Arunachal Pradesh is specifically important in this scenario. So, if you look at the location of Arunachal Pradesh right here, you will see that it shares the border with Tibet Autonomous Region, and it is also hosting Tawang, which is culturally very significant when we are talking about the Tibetan Buddhism. Furthermore, it has always been very politically and geopolitically sensitive, because if you can see, you will realize that how this is in extreme proximity to the Siliguri Corridor, which is also known as the Chicken Neck Corridor. Now, this is only a 22-kilometer wide link that we have to northeast India. That means this area also becomes militarily sensitive. So, when we are talking about Arunachal Pradesh as a state, you have to understand that the location of Arunachal Pradesh is not the only factor that it makes it significant or important, because if we talk about the border, it shares direct border with the Tibetan Autonomous Region. It is the place which hosts Tawang, the birthplace of 6th Dalai Lama, and it is religiously and also culturally very important, especially to Tibetan Buddhism. Other than that, this place stands militarily sensitive also, politically sensitive also, because of the democratic integration that we have seen, because of the Chicken Neck Corridor right here, which is so sensitive. This is a 22-kilometer corridor that connects main India and northeast India, and this is the only land link that we have present. So, the proximity to this also is something that makes Arunachal Pradesh extremely sensitive as well as significant. And add to the layer of Chinese claim that we get to see, China goes ahead and calls this region as Xinjiang, which is southern Tibet, and that means China outrightly rejects India's sovereignty claims entirely. Let me remind you, it was a recent incident where a resident from Arunachal Pradesh was passing via China, and Chinese authority detained because they did not recognize the Indian passport for a resident in Arunachal Pradesh. So, this makes it highly sensitive, not just militarily, politically, but also in the geopolitical foray as well, because as China places Arunachal Pradesh in the core interest list, that means this is going to the next hotspot of escalation that you get to see, especially between India and China. Now, in this very context, it also becomes important to look into the history around this region, that why all of a sudden this has become non-negotiable for China, whereas back in 1950s, China was ready to accept India's sovereignty. So, it was not as simple as it looks, because when we are talking about 1959, when this exchange was offered, the dispute originated way before that. So, if we are talking about the boundary that was defined, that was properly defined in 1914 during Shimla Convention, and this boundary was defined by McMahon Line. So, McMahon Line is the one which is used to define the boundary between India and China. Sorry. Right? This is the boundary that was defined. This is the McMahon Line. Now, China later rejected it because it was a colonial imposition. That means Britishers were the one who brought this boundary definition, and they considered it to be illegitimate because Tibet was involved in the negotiation, China was not. India as of now, as of today, still sits on this agreement and has clearly defined that McMahon Line has been inherited legally, and we have the continuous administrative control of Arunachal Pradesh post 1947, and because of this difference, there never has been any mutually accepted boundary, only the long-term dispute that we get to see. Now, after 1947, there came a time, especially I am talking about 1959, when Zhou Enlai, who was Chinese premier, he said that China is ready to recognize India's control over Arunachal. Back then it was known as NEFA, Northeastern Frontier Area, and in return they wanted India to recognize Chinese control over Aksai Chin. So the whole idea China was following back then, Aksai Chin was very important for them in terms of Xinjiang and Tibet connectivity. So they were looking forward to that, and that is why they were like, okay, we will accept your claim over Arunachal, which was never a claim. It has been always legally inherited and administrative control has been with India. So it is not a disputed place that China will let us have. And they were like, in exchange, you give us Aksai Chin. But this was not accepted by our back Prime Minister. But this was not accepted by our then Prime Minister, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru. And this incident, I have brought it up to show that at one point of time, China was ready to let go in their own head. But yes, they were ready to let go of Arunachal, or back then as it was known as NEFA. And it was considered on table. It was basically negotiable. Later, it was rejected by our Prime Minister, and he also clarified that if we accept his terms, the terms dictated by China, we would be accepting the Aksai Chin loss, and that means we will legitimize the Chinese aggression. And there was also fear, if we do this once, this might happen again. And of course, there were also domestic, political and moral considerations involved. As a reason, the talks collapsed. And this was the starting point of 1962 Indo-China war that we saw, Sino-Indian war that we saw. So the build-up came up from this 1959 package deal which was offered, which India rejected, and the outcome came out to be the war that we had to fight, and unfortunately we suffered a huge setback back then as well. Now in this context, there comes also a question that what happened that all of a sudden China has flipped its stance, where Arunachal was negotiable from their end. Now they have decided and put up it in the core interest. This has been hardened by multiple changes, especially in terms of stature and power that China has seen over the years. When we talk about China, it calls itself the second largest economy. It has advanced military as well as border infrastructure, and it holds a huge confidence, especially in terms of power projection. So this is also one way of projecting power, but the reason China is holding so strong and claiming onto Arunachal Pradesh, hardening its stance, that is why we get to see, because of the structural changes that have happened since 1950s. Other than that, it is also tied to the ideological shift. China is looking towards national rejuvenation. They are trying to consolidate all the places they are claiming to, either by force or any other way, and that is being done to get regime legitimacy. And all of this will help and boost the civilizational nationalism, which is a very fundamental part of this country and how it functions. So what earlier was wanted or could have managed, now it has become as a part of ideological identity. China has said it so often, now it wants it on the plate. That is what is happening, nothing other than that. Now because of this thought, a lot would be at the end of India to be considered and to be managed, because these recent actions clearly signal escalation. Because this is what we have seen as a pattern at China's end of the coercive diplomacy. For example, detention of Indian citizens, especially who are born in Arunachal Pradesh, I just gave you an example. Rejection of Indian passports which mention Arunachal. Official statements that deny Arunachal's existence as an Indian state. And all of this and putting Arunachal in the core interest is nothing but strategic messaging. And this is where India needs to understand that there are not just geopolitical but multiple dimensions that need to be addressed that we have seen in recent times. Be it the standoffs that we have seen, they might come up again in the coming times. The two frontier war that we talk about, that seems like a reality. And the eastern sector that has remained calm, which is not a possibility if Chinese aggression is seen like that. Furthermore, at the geopolitical end, it is a signal to India, especially when India and US are coming together. They are looking towards an FTA, which has been on table for a while. And India is very strongly standing for the Indo-Pacific balancing. So China wants India to mind first is its own backyard before it goes on protecting others' backyards. This is what China is signaling, and that is why it becomes of immense importance that India addresses it not just diplomatically but in power and might, because the escalation would be not at one front. And Pakistan, as an all-time ally, multiplies this problem as a two-front pressure strategy itself. Now let me know in the comment section that what should be done from India to address this situation right away. Because if we talk about, because in conclusion, I would like to mention that this shift of China that we are seeing, it is basically a revisionist assertion they are making, and it is just linked to China's grand strategy. It is important that India sits over it and plans a strategic response, because Arunachal is not just a national issue about borders, it is important for setting Asia's as well as global balance. That is all from my side. Thank you so much.